The wind howled outside the small cabin, carrying the sharp bite of the late-night storm through the cracks in the wooden walls. Inside, the fire crackled in the stone hearth, offering the only warmth in a place that felt more like a refuge than a home. Ethan had lived here for years, ever since the war had ended, and the colony had become a quiet, lonely place. He had grown accustomed to the solitude. The stars above were the only company he needed. He hadn't planned on anything changing that night. He had planned on another evening spent in silence, staring into the flames, trying to forget what had happened, what he had lost. But then the knock came. Ethan's hand froze mid-reach as he set down his mug. He didn't expect visitors. Not out here. Not this far from any of the remaining settlements. His first instinct was to ignore it. Maybe it was just the storm playing tricks on him. But then came the second knock, louder this time. Something made him stand, to walk toward the door. When he opened it, the cold air hit him like a slap, and he squinted into the dim light of the storm. Standing on the threshold was a girl, an alien girl, looking every bit as out of place as the storm itself. She was shivering, soaked to the bone, her silver-blue skin glowing faintly in the darkness. She had long, dark hair that stuck to her face, and her eyes, even in the dim light, seemed to shimmer with an unspoken sorrow. Her voice was soft but clear, almost musical. "Please, can I come in?" "I need shelter." Ethan hesitated. It wasn't that he didn't want to help. It was just that he didn't know how to help someone who wasn't human. But she looked so vulnerable, so fragile, standing there in the rain. And the part of him that still remembered how to care couldn't leave her out there. He stepped aside, letting her in. She didn't speak as she entered, just pulled her drenched cloak around her tighter and sank into the corner by the fire. Ethan closed the door, locked it, and turned back toward her. He didn't know what to say. He had never been good at talking to strangers, let alone ones that looked like her. She seemed to sense his hesitation and glanced up at him with eyes full of uncertainty. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice still trembling, but no longer from the cold. "I didn't know where else to go." "You're welcome," Ethan replied, his voice rough from the silence he had kept for too long. He motioned toward the fire. "Sit by the fire. You'll warm up faster." She nodded and walked slowly over to the hearth. She wasn't tall, even by human standards, but there was something about her that made her seem larger than she was. Something in the way she carried herself, the way she held her head high. She wasn't afraid of him, not the way most people would have been. She was calm, and that only made Ethan more uncertain. He busied himself with preparing something to eat, though the quiet between them stretched long and thick. As he worked, he couldn't help but glance at her. She was staring into the fire, her face illuminated by the warm glow. There was a strange sadness in her eyes, like she was carrying a weight too heavy for anyone to bear. Ethan cleared his throat. "What's your name?" He wasn't sure why he asked. It felt strange to break the silence, but it also felt stranger to sit there without knowing anything about the person sitting in front of him. "Lyra," she answered softly. She didn't look up, but her voice held a certain strength, a quiet power, that made Ethan want to ask more, even though he didn't know why.
"Lyra!"
Ethan repeated the name as though it could give him some kind of clue about who she was, what she was doing here. "Where did you come from?" Lyra hesitated, then finally turned to face him. Her gaze met his, and for a moment, Ethan was struck by the intensity of it. It was like she could see right through him, past the layers of walls he had built around himself. "I came from the colony," she said slowly, as though weighing each word. "But it was destroyed." "By the Great Dominion." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. By the Great Dominion. The Great Dominion. He had heard of them, of course. They were one of the most feared factions in the galaxy, known for their brutal campaigns and their relentless expansion. It made sense that she would have to flee from them. But still, "Are you the only one?" he asked, even though he didn't want to. He knew the answer before she spoke, but he had to ask. Lyra looked down, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to reach for something but couldn't. Yes, I am alone now. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with its own kind of noise. Ethan didn't know what to say. How could he? He was just a simple man on a colony, trying to rebuild after the wars had torn everything apart. What could he possibly offer someone like her? What did she need from him? I'll help you if I can, he said, finally breaking the silence. But it's a dangerous place outside. I don't know if... I know, Lyra interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce, full of a quiet strength that caught him off guard. I have seen more danger than you can imagine, Ethan. But there is something I need, something that will save me, and save everyone. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He had no idea what she was talking about, but the urgency in her voice made it impossible to ignore. He could tell that this wasn't just a request for shelter. It was something more. What do you need? He asked, leaning forward, his curiosity piqued. Lyra's eyes flickered toward the door, as if checking for something, or someone, before she turned back to him. There is a place, a city, not far from here. Inside it is something powerful, something ancient. I need it. I need your help to get it? Ethan blinked, unsure if he had heard her right. A city? What's there? What are you looking for? She shook her head, as though she couldn't fully explain. I cannot tell you everything.
Not yet, but I need you.
You're human. You can go where I cannot. You can help me find it. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ethan looked at her, trying to make sense of everything. He wasn't an explorer, wasn't a hero. He had no reason to risk his life for some alien artifact, but there was something about her, something that made him want to help her, to understand. What is it you're asking me to do? He asked, his voice steady despite the confusion swirling inside him. Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that wasn't sadness or fear. It was hope. Help me find the artifact. It's the only chance we have. Ethan took a deep breath. He didn't know what this meant, or what it would lead to. But he had already made his decision. He would help her. He had no other choice. All right, he said finally. I'll help you. Lyra nodded, her expression grateful. She stood, moving to the door as though something had called her there. Thank you, she whispered, turning to look at him one last time before stepping out into the night. Ethan watched her disappear into the storm, his thoughts racing. There was more to this than she was letting on. More than just an alien girl looking for shelter. He wasn't sure what he had just agreed to, but somehow he knew it would change everything. The next morning the storm had passed, leaving behind only the faint scent of wet earth and the gentle hum of distant thunder. Ethan stood at the window, gazing out over the landscape. It was a quiet, peaceful scene, but it felt different today. He felt as though something had shifted in the air, something unseen but powerful. He had promised to help Lyra. The words kept echoing in his mind. What had he agreed to? He still wasn't sure what it was that she needed from him, but the look in her eyes, her hope, had convinced him to act. He had been alone for so long, and for once someone had asked for his help. He wasn't going to let her down. Ethan dressed quickly, gathering his tools and checking the provisions he had. He hadn't gone out into the wilds in a long time, but he knew how to survive out there. The land was harsh, and he had learned how to navigate its dangers after years of living alone. But this was different. He wasn't just going out for a supply run. He was heading into a place he hadn't been to in years, a ruined city where danger lurked at every turn. When he returned to the cabin, he found Lyra already there, standing near the fire. Her figure seemed almost ethereal in the flickering light, her eyes fixed on the flame, as if she could see something beyond it. She was still dressed in her wet clothes, but now they were drying by the fire. Her hair was no longer plastered to her face, but the worry in her expression hadn't faded. "Ready?" Ethan asked as he stepped into the room, his voice softer than he intended. He wasn't sure how to approach her yet. She was an alien, but she didn't feel like one, not in the way he had expected. She felt more human than most people he'd met in his life. There was an emotional depth to her, something real and raw that made Ethan want to understand her more. Lyra turned to face him, her gaze meeting his. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice steady, though there was a hint of unease in her eyes. "But I need you to understand, Ethan. This isn't just about finding the artifact. There's more at stake than you realize." Ethan nodded. "I don't know much about what you're asking me to do, but I'm here."
I'll help however I can.
She gave a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes.
I'm grateful.
"You don't know what this means to me." They left the cabin together, stepping out into the bright morning light. The air was cool and the land around them looked deceptively peaceful. Ethan led the way, his boots crunching softly on the gravel path. Lyra followed closely behind, her eyes scanning the horizon. He noticed she moved with a grace that wasn't entirely human, an otherworldly fluidity in her steps, as though she was attuned to the land in a way that he couldn't comprehend. As they walked, Lyra spoke quietly, telling Ethan more about her past. "My people, my race. They were peaceful once. We had our own world, our own way of life. But the Great Dominion came. They wanted what we had, our resources, our knowledge. They didn't care that we were peaceful. They destroyed everything." Ethan listened carefully, his mind processing the weight of her words. It sounded like something straight out of a history book, but he knew it was real. He had seen what the Great Dominion had done to other worlds. He'd heard the stories of the destruction, the lives lost, but to hear it from Lyra, to see the pain in her eyes, made it all too real. "How did you survive?" Ethan asked. "How did you escape?" Lyra's eyes grew distant for a moment, as though she was reliving something painful. "I didn't escape. I was lucky. A few of us made it out, but most of my people, they didn't." She stopped walking for a moment, her shoulders sagging slightly.
I'm one of the last. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach.
He couldn't imagine the kind of loss she had experienced. He had lost his family in the war, but they had been human. It was different. He couldn't truly understand what she had gone through, but he knew one thing for sure. She wasn't asking for his help out of weakness. She was asking for it because she had no other choice. They continued their journey, passing through fields of tall grass and rocky outcrops. The landscape seemed to stretch on forever, but Ethan didn't mind the isolation. It was something he had grown used to. What he didn't expect was the sense of urgency that began to settle over him the closer they got to the city. It wasn't just the city that worried him. It was the strange energy in the air, the feeling that something was waiting for them. Lyra had spoken of the artifact, of its power. He didn't understand what it was yet, but he had a feeling it was more than just a relic. It was something that could tip the balance of power in the galaxy, and Lyra needed it to save her people. As they approached the outskirts of the ruins, the landscape shifted. The earth was scarred, marked by the remnants of the past. Broken buildings, charred by fire, stood as silent witnesses to the destruction that had once been. It was a ghost town, a place abandoned by time and forgotten by most. The very air seemed heavy with history, with echoes of what had been. "Stay close," Ethan muttered, his hand instinctively going to the blaster at his side. The ruins might look deserted, but he knew better than to trust the silence. There could be anything hiding here, remnants of the Great Dominion, or worse. Lyra nodded, but she didn't seem afraid. Her eyes scanned the horizon, alert and focused. She wasn't just looking for the artifact. She was looking for something else, something hidden within these ruins. Ethan didn't know what it was, but he could tell it was important. They walked deeper into the ruins, the cracked streets echoing with their footsteps. The further they went, the more Ethan felt that something was watching them. His instincts were on high alert. It wasn't just the abandoned structures or the eerie silence. It was something in the air. Something subtle, but present. Finally, they reached the entrance to the old city hall. It stood tall and imposing, its once grand doors now shattered and hanging loosely from their hinges. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the entrance. "This is it," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "The artifact is inside. I can feel it." Ethan hesitated for a moment, looking around the area. It didn't feel right. The place was too quiet, too empty. It was as if it had been waiting for them, just as Lyra had been waiting for this moment. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "I'm not so sure about this." Lyra turned to face him, her expression soft but resolute. "It has to be. It's the only way. I need to get it." "I don't know what will happen if I don't." Ethan didn't respond. He could see the fear in her eyes, the weight of responsibility that pressed down on her shoulders. She wasn't just looking for an artifact. She was looking for hope. With a deep breath, Ethan nodded. "All right, let's do this." They entered the building together, their steps echoing in the empty halls. The air inside was stale, the remnants of the past still lingering in the shadows. It felt like a place frozen in time, a place where nothing had moved in years. As they moved deeper into the building, Lyra stopped suddenly, her eyes narrowing as she looked down at the floor. "It's here," she whispered. "It's beneath us." Ethan looked around, but there was nothing obvious. The floor was cracked and uneven, but nothing seemed out of place. He didn't know what she was sensing, but he could tell she was certain. "All right, what now?" Ethan asked. Lyra bent down, brushing the dust away from a section of the floor. "Help me," she said. Together they moved the debris aside, revealing a hidden trapdoor beneath. Lyra's hands trembled as she reached for the latch, but Ethan could see the determination in her face. She had come this far, and she wasn't turning back. With a sharp pull, the trapdoor creaked open, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the unknown. Ethan glanced at Lyra, then back at the dark abyss below. This was it. They were in too deep now, but there was no turning back. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The trapdoor creaked open with an eerie groan, and Ethan hesitated for a moment, peering into the darkness below. Lyra didn't wait for him to catch up. She stepped forward, her eyes already adjusting to the dim light from the ancient building. Ethan followed her down, feeling the coolness of the underground air as it washed over him. The stairs were old and crumbling, covered in layers of dust and decay. His boots echoed softly, and the only sound that filled the silence was their breathing. Lyra led the way, her movements confident and sure. Ethan had to admit it was unsettling how at ease she seemed in a place like this, a place that had been abandoned for so long. She had told him it was here, deep within the ruins, but it was hard for him to believe that something so important could be hidden in a place like this. The walls were damp and covered in the markings of time, and everything around them seemed to be falling apart. They reached the bottom of the stairs and entered a long, narrow corridor. The walls were lined with old, rusted machinery, some of it barely recognizable, and others that looked like they had never been used at all. Ethan could feel the weight of the past pressing in on him, and his eyes kept darting around, half expecting something to jump out at him from the shadows. Lyra didn't stop, though. She kept walking, her gaze fixed ahead, as though she knew exactly where she was going. Ethan followed closely behind, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling crawling up his spine. He wanted to ask her more questions, but something told him that now wasn't the time. This place, whatever it was, held answers. Answers that Lyra seemed to know, but wasn't yet ready to share. He could feel that much in the air. They reached the end of the corridor, where the walls opened up into a large chamber. The room was dark, but the faint glow from Lyra's skin seemed to illuminate the area just enough for them to see. The room was circular, with a high ceiling, and in the center stood a pedestal. On that pedestal was an object, covered by a large sheet of cloth. Lyra moved forward without hesitation, her eyes never leaving the object as she approached it. "This is it," she whispered, her voice filled with reverence. "This is what I've been looking for." Ethan stepped closer, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The room itself felt ancient, as though it had been waiting for something, or someone. The air was thick with the weight of history, and the object on the pedestal seemed to pulse with a strange energy. It was difficult to make out what it was at first, but as Lyra reached forward and carefully pulled the cloth away, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was a weapon, or at least, that's what it looked like. The shape was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Sleek, metallic, and almost alive in its design. The surface shimmered in the dim light, and the air around it seemed to hum with an almost tangible energy. Ethan felt an uneasy knot form in his stomach as he stared at the weapon. "Lyra, what is this?" Ethan asked, his voice low, unsure if he truly wanted to know the answer. Lyra turned to him, her eyes now glowing brighter than before, filled with a strange intensity. "This is the power my people lost," she said, her voice steady but filled with a deep sorrow.
It's an ancient artifact, one capable of destroying entire worlds.
Ethan's heart raced, and his mind struggled to process her words. Destroying worlds? How could something like that be real? But there was no mistaking the way the weapon shimmered, the way the energy in the room seemed to respond to it. This wasn't just any relic. It was something far more dangerous. "Why do you need it?" Ethan asked, though part of him already knew the answer. The desperation in Lyra's voice, the way she had spoken of the Great Dominion and her people's destruction, it all pointed to the same thing. She needed this weapon to fight back. Lyra's gaze never wavered from the weapon as she spoke. "The Great Dominion, they won't stop. They destroyed my home, my people."
I have nothing left. This is the only chance I have to defeat them, to save what's left of my race.
"With this, I can take down their fleets, their strongholds. I can make them pay." Ethan stepped closer, his mind racing. The gravity of the situation was sinking in. This wasn't just about helping an alien girl anymore. This was about war, about galactic-scale destruction. The weapon before them could change everything. If it fell into the wrong hands, it could be catastrophic. But if Lyra was right, if the Great Dominion was truly as powerful and ruthless as she had described, then maybe this was their only hope. But was he willing to risk everything for it? "I don't know, Lyra," Ethan said, his voice uncertain. "This weapon? It's too dangerous. What if you can't control it? What if—" "I can control it," she interrupted, her voice sharp, though there was a trace of fear beneath the surface. "I must control it. If I don't, everything will be lost. My people, the last of them, they're depending on me." Ethan was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the weapon. He had seen the devastation caused by the Great Dominion. He had seen the wreckage of entire worlds, the lives lost in their wake. The thought of ending it all, of taking down the enemy once and for all, was tempting. But at what cost? Was he willing to help Lyra destroy so many, even if it meant saving her people? "I don't want to make this decision," Ethan said quietly, his voice strained. "I don't want to be responsible for something that could wipe out entire fleets, but I can't stand by and do nothing either." Lyra looked at him, her eyes searching his face, trying to read him. "I don't want to destroy everything, Ethan. I just want to stop the ones who caused the destruction in the first place." "I want to stop the Great Dominion before they can do it again." Ethan nodded, slowly, though doubt still lingered in his mind. He wanted to believe in her, to trust her. But there were so many unknowns. How could he know that this wasn't going to turn into something far worse than what they had already been through? Then let's do it, Ethan said, his voice firming. He wasn't sure if he was making the right choice, but he knew that in that moment, it was the only choice he could make. Let's stop the Crate Dominion. Together. Lyra's face softened, her eyes filling with gratitude. She reached out to him, her hand trembling slightly, but the gratitude in her touch was undeniable. Thank you, Ethan. You don't know what this means to me. To my people. Ethan gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. I don't know what it means to you, Lyra, but I know that whatever happens, I'm with you. With that, Lyra turned back to the weapon, her fingers brushing over its surface as if she could feel its power coursing through her. Ethan stood beside her, his heart pounding in his chest, and together, they prepared for the next step in their journey. The Crate Dominion was coming. And now, with the weapon in their hands, they had a chance to fight back. The air in the underground chamber felt heavier now, charged with the weight of the decision they had made. Ethan stood beside Lyra, watching as she gently touched the weapon, feeling the hum of its power. He had promised to help her, but now that they were standing at the threshold of something so dangerous, a deep unease settled over him. The weapon in front of them could change everything, but was it the right choice? Was Lyra's desperation enough to justify using such a powerful tool? They had made their decision together, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something they didn't fully understand. The weapon pulsed in the silence, as though it was waiting, anticipating the moment when it would be called upon. Lyra finally turned to face him, her expression set with determination, though there was a trace of fear in her eyes. We need to leave now, she said quietly. The Crate Dominion's forces will be searching for us soon. If they know we have this weapon. Ethan nodded, understanding the urgency. They couldn't waste any more time. If the Dominion found them, the consequences would be catastrophic, not just for them, but for everyone. The weapon was far too powerful to fall into the wrong hands, and right now, their only hope of stopping the Dominion lay in getting it to safety. He turned toward the trap door, ready to leave the chamber. Lyra moved beside him, her steps quick and purposeful. Ethan couldn't help but notice the change in her. She had always been strong, but now there was a fierce intensity about her, a quiet determination that made her seem more than just a girl fighting for survival. She was becoming a leader, someone willing to sacrifice everything to protect her people. As they climbed back up the stairs, the darkness around them seemed to press in closer, but Lyra's presence kept him grounded. It was clear now that they were more than just allies. They were partners, each relying on the other in ways they hadn't fully understood at first. He had promised to help her, and now he was in this with her, no matter where it led. They reached the surface, and the light of the outside world hit them like a wave, bright and blinding after the darkness of the ruins. Ethan squinted, his eyes adjusting to the light as he scanned the area. Everything looked peaceful, too peaceful. The storm had passed, but there was a lingering tension in the air, as though something was about to break. We need to move fast, Lyra said, her voice urgent. The Dominion won't be far behind. We can't risk staying here any longer. Ethan agreed, but there was a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. The Crate Dominion was relentless, and if they had already discovered the weapon was gone, they would stop at nothing to retrieve it. They had to stay one step ahead. He led the way, navigating through the familiar terrain of the colony. He had spent years learning the landscape, knowing every rock and tree, every hidden path that could get him to safety. But this time, there was no safety to be found.
Not until they were far from here. As they moved through the forest, the weight of the weapon between them seemed to grow heavier with each step.
Ethan couldn't help but feel the gravity of it all. The power, the responsibility. He had no idea what would happen once they used it, but he knew one thing for certain. This was no longer just about Lyra's survival. It was about the future of entire worlds. They reached a small clearing, where Ethan had set up a hidden camp. It wasn't much, just a few tents and some supplies, but it was safe for the moment. He quickly started a fire, his mind racing as he tried to think of their next move. Lyra stood a little apart from him, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her expression unreadable. Ethan could see the conflict in her, the weight of the choice she had made. She was carrying the future of her people on her shoulders, and it wasn't a burden she would take lightly. "We need to make contact with the resistance," she said, her voice steady, though Ethan could sense the urgency beneath her calm exterior. "They'll help us get the weapon to the right place. They'll know how to use it." Ethan nodded. "And how do we reach them?" "The Crate Dominion has eyes everywhere." Lyra's gaze shifted to him, her eyes filled with resolve. "We'll send a signal. I've been in contact with them before, but it's been too dangerous to do anything openly. Now, we don't have time to wait. We need to act fast." Ethan wasn't sure if he was ready for what that meant. Sending a signal to the resistance meant putting themselves in even greater danger. It meant exposing their location and possibly drawing the attention of the Crate Dominion. But he knew there was no turning back now. The weapon was too powerful, and if they didn't act, they would lose everything. "We do it your way," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I'll help you however I can." Lyra gave a small nod of gratitude, but the weight of their situation hung between them. They both knew the risks. They both knew what was at stake, but they also knew that they couldn't afford to fail. As the fire crackled in the quiet of the night, Lyra set to work, her fingers moving deftly as she prepared the communication device. Ethan kept watch, his eyes scanning the forest, but it was hard to shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Dominion's forces could be anywhere, and they had to be ready for anything. It didn't take long before Lyra activated the device. A soft beep echoed in the night air, followed by a low hum as the signal was sent out. Lyra's eyes never left the device, her fingers flying over the controls as she worked to establish contact. "Come on," she murmured, her voice tense. "Please, answer." Ethan stood beside her, watching the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Every moment they spent waiting increased the likelihood that the Dominion would find them. But just as he was about to suggest they move again, the device beeped. Lyra's face lit up, and she quickly adjusted the settings. The image on the screen flickered for a moment before stabilizing. A voice came through, crackling with static, but the words were clear.
"This is the Resistance, Lyra. We've been waiting for your signal."
"What's your status?" Lyra didn't hesitate. "I have the weapon," she said, her voice steady despite the urgency.
I need your help. The Crate Dominion is closing in.
"We can't afford to wait any longer." There was a long pause on the other end, and Ethan could hear the sound of someone typing in the background. Finally, the voice came back, more urgent this time. "Understood. We'll send a team to extract you. Stay where you are, and don't engage the enemy. We'll handle it from here." Lyra didn't say anything for a moment. She looked at Ethan, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "It's done," she said quietly. "They're coming for us." Ethan took a deep breath. They had done it. The resistance was on their way, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. But they weren't out of danger yet. The Dominion would be relentless, and they would stop at nothing to get the weapon back. Ethan turned to Lyra. "What now?" "Now," she said, her voice calm but filled with determination, "we wait." They stayed in the clearing for what felt like an eternity, the silence around them filled with tension. Every crack of a branch, every gust of wind made Ethan's heart race, but nothing came. No sound, no movement. It was as though the world had held its breath. Finally, the sound of engines broke the stillness, and Ethan's heart leaped into his throat. The resistance had arrived. He turned to Lyra, who gave him a small, tired smile. "It's over," she said softly. We did it. But Ethan wasn't so sure. The Dominion had the weapon's location now, and no matter how hard they fought, they wouldn't stop until it was in their hands.